I keep a spare key under the ceramic pot by my front door. Not a secret, just a habit from the one time I locked myself out at 2 in the morning and had to call my super, who was not thrilled about it. After that, I put a key under the pot and told exactly one person where it was. My mother. I should have known better. I really should have. But let me back up, because if I start at the moment I walked through my front door that Tuesday evening in early December and heard cartoons blasting from my living room, you won't understand why I didn't just scream. You won't understand why I stood in my own doorway, keys still in my hand, and made a choice to be very, very calm. So let me start where it actually started, with a phone call on a Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks before everything fell apart. I'm 29. I've lived alone in my apartment in Columbus, Ohio for almost 4 years. It's a one-bedroom on the third floor of a building I genuinely love. Exposed brick, good light, a super named Jared who fixes things within 48 hours. I pay $1,140 a month, which is not nothing on my salary as a dental office coordinator, but I make it work. I have a budget spreadsheet. I have a meal plan. I have a system. I built that system from scratch because nobody handed it to me. My brother. I'll call him my brother because that's what he is 34. He's been married for 6 years to a woman I'll call my sister-in-law, and together they have 3 kids, ages 7, 4, and 2. They live about 40 minutes from me, in the house my parents helped them with the down payment on. My brother works in HRH. My sister-in-law does not work outside the home. That's their choice, and I genuinely respect it. Except for what it seemed to produce in them, which was a very fixed belief that anyone in the family without children had infinite free time and zero personal needs. My mother lives 15 minutes from me. She retired 2 years ago and has a lot of opinions about how I spend my weekends. The phone call that Sunday was from her. Your brother and Diane are really struggling, she said. Diane is my sister-in-law. I said okay. I asked what was going on. The kids are a lot right now. The 2-year-old isn't sleeping. Diane is exhausted. Your brother's been doing double shifts. She paused. They need a break, honey, a real one. I said I understood, and I did. 3 kids under 8 is genuinely hard. I have nothing but sympathy for that in the abstract. I was thinking, my mother said, what if they used your place for a few days over the holidays? You're going to be off work for Christmas week anyway. You could stay with me. It would be good for them. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Mom, I said, I'm not going to stay with you for a week so my brother can use my apartment. It's just a few days. My apartment is a 1-bedroom. There are 5 of them. Kids don't take up that much space. I want to be clear. I did not yell. I did not say anything cruel. I explained, calmly and clearly, that my apartment was not available, that it was not set up for 5 people, that I had my own plans for the holidays, and that if my brother and Diane needed a break, there were other options, a hotel, my mother's own house, literally anywhere else. My mother said I was being selfish. I said I was being reasonable. We went around twice more, and then I ended the call. I thought that was the end of it. I did not think about the key under the ceramic pot. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening, I got off work at 5:30. Normal day. I stopped at Kroger for groceries, picked up a rotisserie chicken and some sweet potatoes, drove home. The parking lot was normal. The hallway was normal. I heard my neighbor's dog doing its usual thing behind 3B. And then I reached my door and stopped. There was noise coming from inside my apartment. Loud noise. The kind that takes up space. A cartoon theme song I vaguely recognized. A child shrieking with laughter. Something plastic clattering against a hard floor. I stood in the hallway with my grocery bag and my keys, and I thought, I am hearing this correctly. That is definitely coming from inside my apartment. I put my key in the lock and pushed the door open. My living room had been rearranged. The couch was pushed against the far wall. A pack and play had been set up in the corner, a full pack and play with a little fabric mobile attached. My coffee table was shoved into the kitchen doorway and covered with snacks, juice boxes, and a half-eaten container of animal crackers. The TV was on. Volume somewhere around a 7, playing a cartoon I did not own on streaming. The 7-year-old was on my couch. The 4-year-old was on my floor. Both of them looked up at me. My sister-in-law came out of my bedroom. She was in leggings and a sweatshirt, holding the 2-year-old on her hip. And she had the expression of someone who had been caught doing something but was going to front it out. "Oh, good, you're home," she said, like I was the one arriving late to a plan we'd both agreed on. I looked at her. I looked at the pacne. I looked at the groceries in my hand, a rotisserie chicken for one, which now felt darkly absurd. "Where's my brother?" I said. "He's at work. He'll be by later." "Where's my mother? She said she'd check in tomorrow." I set the groceries on the kitchen counter. I took a breath. I looked around my apartment, my dishes in the drying rack, my plant on the windowsill, my weighted blanket folded on the couch arm. Now pushed to one end because the 7-year-old was sitting where I sit every single night, and I made a decision. I was not going to react. Not yet. "Okay," I said. I was very calm. I was so calm it almost scared me. "I need to make a phone call. I'll be in the hallway." I went back out into the hallway, closed the door behind me, and stood there for a minute just breathing. Here's the thing about calling the police immediately. I know, in retrospect, that several people would say I should have. And honestly, I called the non-emergency line right then, standing in that hallway. The officer I spoke to was patient and kind, and explained something that I already sort of suspected. That because these were family members and there was no evidence of a break-in, removing them was a civil matter. It would require going through an eviction process, which would take time. She recommended I document everything and speak to an attorney if they refused to leave voluntarily. So I had my answer. The police couldn't just walk in and remove them tonight, which meant I had to be smarter than my feelings. I went back inside. I told my sister-in-law I needed to understand the situation. She explained it like she was doing me a favor. My mother had suggested it. My brother thought it was a good idea. They'd planned to be there just for the week. To decompress, she said. And they'd assumed I'd understand once I knew how bad things had gotten. They'd taken my bedroom. The kids were in the living room. My sister-in-law said it like it was obvious that this was the arrangement. I said very evenly, "And who has my key?" She said my mother had let them in and left the key on the kitchen counter. I checked. It was there. I pocketed it. That night, I slept on my own couch, pushed to one side, the packnum play a foot away from my feet, and I stared at the ceiling and thought very carefully about what I was going to do. Because here's what I knew. If I blew up, they would play victim. My mother would cry. My brother would say I was attacking his family. My sister-in-law would tell everyone at Christmas that I'd screamed at her children. I'd be the villain of the story for the next 5 years at every family gathering. I needed this to end without me being the one who burned it down. So I started making notes. I texted my mother that night, "I know what you did. I'd like to talk tomorrow." She responded with a string of texts about how she just wanted to help the family, and I had so much space and wasn't using it anyway. I didn't respond to any of them. I screenshotted everything. The next morning, I called my leasing office before I left for work. I explained the situation, that unauthorized individuals were occupying my unit without my knowledge or consent. My leasing agent, a woman named Louise, who has always been straightforward with me, told me that having unauthorized long-term occupants was indeed a lease violation, but that the violation would be my responsibility as the leaseholder. She said if I allowed it to continue beyond a certain point, it could affect my standing as a tenant. She also said that if they refused to leave, I would need to go through a formal process, but that she could provide me with documentation of our conversation. I asked her to email me that documentation. She did. I spent my lunch break taking photos on my phone. The pack and play, the rearranged furniture, the food in my cabinets that wasn't mine. I am a creature of habit. I know every item in my kitchen, and there were now 2 bags of goldfish crackers and a box of Cocoa Puffs that I did not buy. I photographed my bedroom, my dresser with their bags on top of it, my closet partially occupied, my bedside table with someone else's phone charger plugged in. I sent everything to my personal email with timestamps. My brother came by that evening. He sat on the couch, my couch in my living room, while his kids ate dinner at my table, and told me he really appreciated my support. He said things had been really hard. He said Diane needed this. I said, "How long were you planning to stay?" He said, "Just through the new year, probably." Through the new year. It was December 9th. I kept my voice level. I said, "I see. And what was the plan for me?" He looked a little uncomfortable. He said my mother had thought I could stay with her. Did anyone ask me? He said they figured I'd be fine with it once I understood. I nodded. I said I needed to think about some things, and I went to make tea in my kitchen while his youngest smeared something orange on my couch cushion. Here's what I did not do. I did not tell them to leave that night. I know that seems counterintuitive, but I had a plan forming and it required a few more days. I called my friend who works in property management, not to get legal advice because she's not a lawyer, but because she understood lease language better than most. She confirmed what Louise had told me. I was the leaseholder. They were unauthorized occupants, and if they didn't leave voluntarily, I'd need a formal notice process. But she also said something useful. That if my mother had used a key I'd given her to let third parties into my unit, that was potentially a matter I could escalate beyond the civil side if I wanted to characterize it as unauthorized entry. She said, "You have more leverage than you think. You just have to use it right." I spent the next 3 days being perfectly pleasant. I went to work. I came home. I made dinner. I did not offer to watch the kids. I did not engage in any conversation about how long they were staying. I also very quietly called a locksmith and scheduled a lock change for the following Monday when everyone would be out. My sister-in-law took the kids to the park every morning around 10. On day 4, I sat my brother down and I showed him everything. The photos, the email from Louise, the screenshots of my mother's texts. I told him calmly that I had documented the unauthorized occupancy of my apartment, that my leasing office was aware, and that I had scheduled a lock change for Monday. I told him they needed to be fully out by Sunday night. He stared at me. He said, "You're serious?" I said, "Completely." He said, "This is your family." I said, "Yes, and this is my home. Those two things are not in conflict unless you make them." He went quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "And I want to be precise here because this is the part that showed me exactly what I was dealing with." He said, "Mom is going to be really upset about this. Not I'm sorry for doing this to you. Not we should have asked." He was worried about my mother being upset, as if I were the one creating a problem. I said, "I think my mother should have thought about that before she gave my key to someone without asking me." My sister-in-law, when my brother told her, cried. Not the guilty kind of crying, the performative kind, where you cry loudly enough that the children look alarmed and you become the center of concern. The 7-year-old hugged her. The 4-year-old started crying too because her mother was crying. It was chaos, and I stood in the doorway of my own kitchen and waited for it to finish. My mother called me 4 times that evening. I let them all go to voicemail. I listened to the messages later. The first 2 were hurt and confused. The 3rd was angry. The 4th was crying. In the 4th one, she said, "I just don't understand why you can't be a team player." I saved that one too. Sunday, my brother and his family left. It took until 7 p.m., which was later than I'd said, but I watched them load their van from my window and I did not help and I did not go down to say goodbye. The apartment smelled like someone else's household when they left. There was a juice box under my couch. The Cocoa Puffs was still in my cabinet because my sister-in-law, in what I can only read as a final little power move, left all their food behind. The locksmith came Monday at 10:15. New keys. New locks. I felt something loosen in my chest when I heard that new deadbolt click for the first time. I did not immediately reach out to my mother. She reached out to me a week later and asked if I was ready to move past this. I said I wasn't sure I was, because to move past something you first have to agree on what it was. She said she was just trying to help my brother. I said I understood that and that what I needed her to understand was that helping my brother by giving away access to my home without asking me, without any conversation, as if my apartment were a resource she could allocate, was not something I was going to pretend was okay. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I didn't think you'd mind that much. That's the whole problem, I said. You didn't think to ask. We didn't resolve it that day. I don't know if we'll fully resolve it for a while. But that conversation, the one where I said the thing out loud and held my ground through the silence that followed, that one felt like it mattered. What I know is this: my apartment is mine. My name is on that lease. My credit history is tied to this address. My deposit is in this building's account. It is not a communal resource. It is not a favor I owe anyone. It is the thing I built carefully on a dental office coordinator's salary, with a budget spreadsheet and a meal plan and a system. And it means exactly as much to me as any house that anyone held anybody else by. I changed my own locks, I kept my documentation, I did not blow up, and I moved the spare key to somewhere only I know. I've thought about this a lot since that Sunday night when I watched the van pull out of my parking lot. Not obsessively, just the way you think about something when it teaches you something real about yourself. The thing that stays with me isn't the anger, though there was plenty of that. It's the moment in the hallway, right after I called the non-emergency line and heard what the officer said. She was kind about it. Civil matter, she said. Document everything. I stood there in my own hallway, outside my own front door, listening to cartoons through the wall, and I had a choice. I could walk back in there screaming, which would have felt good for about 45 seconds, or I could think. I chose to think, and I want to be honest, that wasn't noble, that was strategic. I was angry enough to shake, and the only reason I didn't was because I knew, clearly, that blowing up would cost me more than it cost them. That's the thing nobody tells you about holding your ground quietly. It doesn't feel powerful in the moment. It feels like swallowing something sharp. Every evening I came home from work, made dinner, and acted like I wasn't counting down the days. That took more out of me than any argument would have. But it also gave me something. It gave me the documentation, the lock change, the paper trail, and most importantly, it gave me the conversation with my brother where I could lay everything out without him being able to say I was hysterical or out of control. When people do something wrong and get away with it, it's usually because the person they wronged made it easy. They either exploded and became the story, or they stayed silent and got walked over again. I didn't want to be either of those. I wanted to be the person who said, clearly and without drama, this happened. Here is the evidence. Here is what comes next. My mother thought she was solving a problem. And I understand that impulse, I do. She loves my brother. She loves his kids. She wanted to help. But the way she helped, using a key I gave her for emergencies, letting 5 people into my home without a conversation, assuming I would just absorb the inconvenience because I don't have kids and therefore my space and time are somehow less valuable, that's not love. That's entitlement, wearing love's clothes. And those two things are not the same, even when they come from the same person. What I learned is that protecting yourself is not the same as being cold. Holding a boundary isn't cruelty. Asking to be treated like a person with agency in your own home is the most basic thing there is. And when you do it calmly, with documentation and a locksmith appointment and a very steady voice, people cannot make you the villain, no matter how much they want to. Diane cried. My brother said I was making things hard. My mother called 4 times. None of that changed the outcome because I hadn't acted out of emotion. I had acted out of clarity. And clarity, once you have it, is very difficult for anyone to argue with. The new key is in a drawer only I know about. My apartment smells like mine again. And every time I hear that deadbolt click, I feel exactly the same thing I felt the day I signed that lease. Like I built something, and it's mine.